Welcome, everybody, to this session today from the Gallup Certified Strengths Coach 2022 Learning Series. This is our fifth session of the week. First four have been fantastic. Great feedback, great energy, incredible questions, a lot of sort of learning, provoking thoughts. I've been saying all along, I've got 5-6 pages now of just one-liners, of just like little nuggets that I'm trying to keep up with. So as more of our friends join us, I want to go over a few sort of housekeeping things, right? Chat is here for you to interact with each other, to ask questions, to engage. If you have a question that you want us to try to answer in the conversation or a specific thing you need addressed, chat's going to be tough because there's already about 500 of you in there. And so as we get large numbers in that, it's hard to keep up with the pace. So the Q&A function is your place to ask questions. I'll be monitoring that throughout the whole time today. As we go through this, again, remember, this is for you. Our hope here at Gallup in doing this learning series every year is that we can bring to you our perspective, some ideas, some best practices, but also I think the things we're passionate about, the things we care about in terms of how we talk about these topics, how we learn about them, how we work with clients. And all the topics we're discussing come from your feedback, right? They come from you telling us what you want to learn more about, the kinds of questions you ask us throughout the year. So today, I am just thrilled. Like this is just an absolute delight to welcome back one of my best friends at work, one of my role models in this whole thing, Miss Maika Leibbrandt, who is going to lead us through a conversation on some best practices with group coaching and how you handle some of the issues that may come up and how do you approach a group and a team at a time. This is something that I think many coaches ask us about. If you were to monitor our Facebook groups and our questions, holy cow, the number of issues we get asked about around team settings, group settings, all the time. So when we were building this agenda, I went to Mike and I said, Maika, I need your help with this one because we share best practices a lot, but they get kind of stale. We've shared the same best practices all the time. I want you to be Maika and come up with something cool and different. And I think she's done that. So I'm really excited to let Maika take over. And as a special treat to all of you who are Theme Thursday aficionados over the years, I'm going to take myself off camera. I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to go back in the background and monitor Q&A. This is Maika and Jim for the next hour doing their thing together. So it's going to sort of be a throwback, a little bit of homage, because we don't have Theme Thursday live right now. I'm gladly going to step in the background. Maika, the floor is yours. Let Jim do whatever you want him to do.
Thank you, Austin. What a glowing way to get to step into this role. And so I'll tell you just a little bit about myself for those of you who haven't worked with me before, mostly that I'm just incredibly grateful to be with you today. Here's my top 5. And perhaps you can tell already why a couple things that Austin said in his intro were exactly what I want to step up to the plate for. That idea of do something new. I'm going to pick which one of my top 5 you can see here on the screen that might be. Do something interesting and show up and be Maika. Wow, what a great way to set up a partner. Thank you, Austin. And thanks for everything that this entire group has been doing all week. You have been affecting the world in a very positive way. And the drops that you have dropped into this pond are going to ripple for longer than even you know. I come to you from Western Nebraska, although I have the exact same background that I had for 7 years as we were hosting Theme Thursday. You heard maybe some reflection of Theme Thursday. Let me just help you understand. It's a fantastic learning tool. We didn't retire it. It's not gone away. In fact, I had a good friend of mine who was my neighbor in Virginia Beach. I saw some Virginia Beach people here. Michelle this morning said, "Hey, Maika, how do I hear you talking about Achiever?" It's like, I lived right next to you for 3 years, but here's the podcast. And she responded with, "I thought Theme Thursday went away." It's still there. It's still a wonderful resource and a learning tool. And of course, you can also check out everything on the CliftonStrengths podcast as well. That's a bit around my background. I'm a senior learning consultant here at Gallup. I get paid to keep my ear to the ground on what's working at work and then snap all that together with what Gallup is researching in a way that shows up typically in a classroom or in a coaching conversation. So it's great to be here with you today. Full transparency, I've been focusing a lot on intentionally pressing pause in the midst of a problem and asking myself, what would be the next step if this were easy? And what would be the next step if this were fun? And I had fully prepared an entire one-way keynote for you because I fell into the trap that many of us fall into of thinking that there was a right way to do what you're asked to do. And then as I was driving to the airport earlier this week, I thought, nope, easy and fun. I'm going to call Jim. Thankfully, we get to do this. I will carry most of the weight of our conversation today, but my very best friend in work and life is here to make this conversational. So Jim, thanks for being here on a Thursday.
Mike, it's always great to be with you and looking forward to the topic today.
Awesome. Just for those of you who are joining, if you would like to listen to the audio only, this is going to be a really great audio experience. There are a few slides. You can see right now a title slide. It's just my name and the title of the the session. Strategic Positivity, Woo Communication, Ideation is how I come to you. But I have a total of about 10 slides, and I have you for 40 minutes. So you're not going to miss much. If you want to just plug in some headphones or heck, play this out loud and walk around while you listen, get outside, get some movement. I have a friend listening right now who's currently making bracelets as they listen, just to keep their brain engaged and their tactile movement happening. I promise that I will describe for you what's on the slide, so you won't miss that. Phyllis is knitting. It's fantastic. Jim, should we jump in?
Yeah, Micah, what are we talking about today?
Friend, we're talking about conflict. When Austin introduced me, he didn't just say, Maika is amazing. He also said, we handed Maika a really hard topic. And I think today really will challenge us. It will challenge us to be incredibly real and acknowledge that there's a lot of challenges as coaches that we've been facing that we haven't before. So for those of you who maybe cringe at the word conflict, you can also call it friction. And that may help us remember that conflict in and of itself is not good or bad. It's how you react to it. And with great coaching, friction can create better realities. And isn't that our job as coaches, to stay tethered to that belief that tomorrow can be better than what we're experiencing today, and offer inspiration, offer challenge, offer acknowledgement of the friction in order to elevate our clients' experience?
So we got kind of a structure we're going to do for this. How are we going to go about this?
Great. So I've invited you, Jim, to join me, mostly just to have fun and be my friend. But also, I have two other asks of you. Please keep me grounded if I get too philosophical or too much into the frameworks that I've cooked up, because I'm excited about them. They're new. I have communication and ideation. If I get a little too what if you could join me by asking the yeah, right questions, or even maybe share some micro stories of your own experience. You're, in addition to being a consummate professional and my best friend, you're also a manager and have been really successful in that role in the past. So I'd love it if you'd kind of ground me on that one. And if you could also help me monitor this incredible chat and think on your feet like you always do, I want to make sure that we're involving the community who's here today. How's that sound?
Yeah, it sounds great. I'll be watching chat. We can't cover a lot of it, and you can use the Q&A for this in particular. But Micah, let's take a second. Let's dive in and get right on this.
Thank you. So a couple guardrails that are important, especially virtually, that we have to create on our own, that maybe when we were in person were created for us, that I'd like us all to adhere to today. Whatever is discussed, whether it's from me, Jim, Austin, or anyone in the chat, I want to propose these three agreements. First is that we assume positive intent. That we realize that we're all here for a good reason, and some of us might need to say some things out loud before we totally believe them. This is a safe space to do that, and please assume positive intent from the colleagues that are here with us in the chat. In every way possible, communicate that you respect the questions, the sharing, and respond with curiosity. I got to be in a really meaningful learning space earlier this week, and they were selling t-shirts that said radically curious. So before jumping to conclusions or ascribing any like personal judgment towards something that maybe triggers something in you, good or bad, see if we can indeed respond with curiosity. So let's do this. I got a little bit distracted by Phyllis in the chat, who used a word that triggers me in a positive way. You know what it's going to be, don't you, Jim?
I do,
Yeah.
but say it.
There's a Peloton group.
There you go. I think they've been
#CliftonStrengths.
hashtagging CliftonStrengths, right?
You can follow me. I'm You Got This Mama, and I ride with the queen. Anyway, here we are, strengths-based teams. That's why we're here. And here's Gallup's definition of strengths-based teams. You've probably seen this before, but I want to drag your attention and really spotlight a few of these words. One is the word imperfect. This might as well say humans instead of contributors, because as long as humans are on teams, coaches are going to have a job. We've got this, also the acknowledgement that we need each other. So that's going to be part of the representation and the assumption that we move through when we're talking about how to coach teams through conflict. Maybe it is worth that check-in of how much do we need each other? And when we're working with strengths-based teams, we work with that assumption that solving our ways of working together is going to get us somewhere. Maybe that somewhere is improving our own well-being or improving our own engagement. Maybe it's also getting the stuff done that we have to get done. So it's important that when we're coaching, we don't skip the pre-show. Jim, when everything changed overnight about 2 years ago, I remember a conversation with you when we said, how do we create a great virtual environment for even our own colleagues? And there were 3 things that you and I knew right away. It was, I think I said camera on, mute off, and then you added the 3rd one. You remember what it was?
Remind me, just because I want to make sure I get it right.
Normally I give Jim a script. This is totally off script here. I said, never skip the pre-show. And it was something I learned from Jim in the podcasting world. How do you build a community without being there with them physically? Well, you realize that as a coach, you're never on or off. You're just always there. You are their coach 100%. And so as you're coaching a team, we've always said, go in and coach the manager first. When you're thinking about, especially helping a team through conflict, maybe that coaching the manager is in addition to discovery. And I think about discovery like they talk about it in legal dramas. You really do have to know what you're walking into and what we're expecting on the other side. How are people currently feeling valued for their contribution? What are people's contributions? How much does this team really need each other? What's going on? What is the current state of their awareness around their own strengths and around each other's. But I mentioned earlier that as long as teams are made of people, there's going to be conflict. As we dive into our conversation today, you'll probably realize what I did as I was taking notes about this, which is most of the conflict or friction that we come up with can be described by difference. And there's probably this isn't science, but it's going to sound like it. So disclaimer. There's probably no species on the planet that within that single species has more difference than humans. Like most dogs at the end of the day are still dogs. We are super varied. And that's part of what's so beautiful about the strengths tool is our difference. So again, it's how much do we need each other? Where are our differences that we already know of? And what does excellence look like as we're addressing this situation?
Hey, Mike, I want to clear something up in the chat room. So some folks have not been able to join us for what we call the pre-show. And so that reference may not land with them. Let me explain that really quick. So when we would do Theme Thursdays live, we would have this time of pre, mid, and post shows in between the recordings. And oftentimes the real conversations, right, would start and end during the non-recorded portions of what we were doing. They were the genuine and authentic moments in that. And so by not skipping this pre-show is this idea of even though we were going to be on camera, I think we still needed to be genuine and authentic in all the things that we did, right? It was the real moments that mattered,
right,
in there. And
yes. It's also what it's not is, let me talk about it in the podcast sense, and then I'll get real clear about what we mean for coaches. What it's not is saying, thanks for joining, hang out, we're going to get started in a bit. And then when the clock tells you to, saying, okay, now we're going to be started. What it is as a coach is realizing the minute you pick up that phone for somebody who says, help, I need some strengths advice, you're showing up real in that moment. And that authenticity is going to filter through. So it means do your homework in the nicest way. Show up and realizing that part of your coaching experience, part of the value that you are bringing to positive change for a team is the conversation that you have before the team conversation and the follow-up that you have afterwards.
Micah, can we set the groundwork for some of these ideas of conflict? I'm seeing in the chat right now some, like, it's already starting to separate a little bit. And I know you've got kind of a framework in which we think about this. Can you walk us through that part?
Alicia, I see your question. Is Maika defining friction as difference? No. What I'm saying is a lot of the conflicts. So today we're going to talk through basically 5 different popular conflicts, problems, reasons teams might not be getting along. And my note about difference is that difference gone unvoiced can lead to a difference of expectations that can lead to conflict. There also might be other reasons that there's conflict, but what I found as a commonality across many of the conflicts that I deal with teams, or many of the reasons that colleagues are brought in with teams, or many of the reasons I don't like people, which is very rare. I can't think of any human I've met that I actually don't like, but think about reasons that conflict arises. At the heart of them very often is difference that goes unnoticed, unvalued, or unrecognized. Thank you for asking that and clarifying. As you can see, Jim and I really do love playing off of what you need in the moment. So please feel free to type whatever you're thinking in the chat. And if I can clarify it, I certainly will. If we skip over it, type it in the Q&A and Austin will handle it, because chances are it was a really hard question that I didn't know the answer to. So we're going to talk about 5 things today. We're going to talk, and we're going to use frameworks that you already know that perhaps will just give you a different take on being able to recall these frameworks in the moment while coaching a team. As I've been developing these ideas, I've noticed myself recall these frameworks in the session, in a team session. And I've been able to use them sort of to get a foothold as you're climbing the mountain. I'm not going to give you the answers to how to resolve conflict. I'm not going to give you a prescription for which strength needs something, what exactly it needs in order to feel like they're in this utopia state. But I am hopefully going to give you a way to conceptualize friction, conflict, disagreement, so that you can feel confident sitting with it and holding the space for it and really guiding a team through it. A couple assumptions: this should not be a 101 learning session for you. There's a reason that this is for certified coaches. You really do need to understand, live, and breathe our 5 guiding principles. And the assumption is also that you would be working with an intact team. So again, that's part of the pre-show of doing your homework and checking out what is the state of this team? How important is it that we work together? This has been way too much preamble for the good stuff that we have coming up. So let's start with something I call conflict 0 or phase 0. And I call it that because it's probably the piece that you graduated your certified course thinking about, that if you're not careful, you could explain it away on paper. And that's the idea of strengths that come from different places and by their very nature may not work together if they're coming from 2 different people. So let's try that. Of course, we're assuming positive intent. We're assuming we can get through this. We know that we really value each contributor's contribution here. But in the chat, I'm going to give you maybe 3 different pairs of strengths. And I'd like you to tell me, test your strength knowledge here, why 2 different people or groups of people with each of these pairs might experience friction. The first one is strategic and restorative. Let's say you've got 2 people on a team. They do need to work together. We've done all our homework on there. And now one of them is leading with strategic and the other is leading with restorative. What could lead, just on a strengths location, how might they have some friction?
And you want them to put that in chat,
Go ahead, just
right?
put it in the chat.
You
Yeah,
want
not in
them
the
to
Q&A. We're not
respond
watching that
to
one.
that.
Respond in the chat so all your really smart friends can see how smart you are.
Well, let me ramble a little bit, Mike, as folks are putting things in the chat. How's that sound? I know you have strategic number one, and I think sometimes we would spend a lot of times talking about the right things to do, but it took us a while maybe to get to the decision where restorative may want to approach that from a scenario of getting that fixed and fixed now. Other
Yeah.
themes play into that. In the chat, we got Fred says one's looking back and one's looking forward. Megan says one focused. Oh, these are going fast.
That's all
this
right.
is this
You're
is
on it.
not this is not like this is not like
Interesting.
StreamYard.
Ricardo has him in his top 10, but somebody earlier said that's 1 in 34 for me.
Mm,
Good reminder that there are no opposites on themes,
right.
but there are for people. If you have something number one, the opposite for you is going to feel like what you have at number 34. But inherently, strategic is not the opposite of restorative. I just want to acknowledge what a lot of you have said here. And there's no right answer here. There's not research behind the potential conflict between all 34. However, I love where your head's at because you're thinking about what that could be just when strengths show up as friction instead of function. Strategic might look around a problem and say, we don't have to fix this. I can discard it. It didn't matter. Restorative might say, I love sitting with this and really making sure that we restore it or get it right before we move on. So that could be one reason. There could be 17 other reasons. And I throw out 17 loosely. It's the number I use when I mean a lot. So lots of other things that you said here absolutely could be it. I like that you're seeing the framework of really that phase 0 conflict is strengths that are showing up as friction instead of function. Let's try one more. I think I said 3, but we'll try one. How about maximizer and achiever? Go ahead and type into the chat, or if you're walking, I know several of you are on the treadmill right now, think about it. Tell your neighbor on the other treadmill, and later maybe they'll need you to coach them.
I actually like those two together.
I like all of these together.
I mean,
and
really
it's
like
important
those
for us
two
to
together.
realize that they might, when gone unchecked, just lead to some misguided friction. Look at all these great answers. Yeah, maximizer says it's never done. It could always be better. An achiever says it's not real unless it's done. So maybe it's the pace that we want. Maybe it's where we want to focus. Jim, what are you thinking?
In my case, it might be done versus more done. Like I like to do, but I also like to do a lot. So
Yeah.
it may be that creating tension, right? In that
Yes.
scenario of, I thought we got that done. The maximizer says, but we could do it. We could do more. I think,
Yes.
better would fit. I like more, but so that, yeah, I love that.
And you're describing just the, like, where do we land? What is the most
Right.
important problem that we're solving right here?
Right.
Can I tell you, I fretted over even doing this activity because part of me thought it was so counter philosophy of strengths that, oh, we shouldn't let coaches go there. And then I reminded myself that we are talking about energy. We are talking about how we as coaches can do the yeah, right, and realign and adjust that energy. And if energy is not in a space where you're aware of why there's a difference, that can explode, right? But if you can align that energy and acknowledge that it's real and acknowledge that, yeah, this isn't always awesome. That's what it takes. I heard a podcast yesterday that said change is always preceded by awareness. So we are doing this in a safe space where we are with a bunch of people who already understand the intention of strengths. And now we can get super real about what actually may happen. So that's conflict 0. I named that. You don't have to call it that, but it is remembering that sometimes strengths are just going to help you start that conversation of awareness. Again, if they start with friction, we also have to believe that they can get to function by talking about that. And again, that's another reason you really want to set those safe guardrails around where are we going and what does great look like. The next thing I want to show you, this might be the only visual you actually need. So for those of you on the treadmill, I'm going to describe it to you. If you think about what you know about working with a team, I'd like you to, in your brain, think about a specific rub or friction or conflict or disagreement or not great thing. Now I'm putting judgment on the conflict. Think about a reason that a team might not be functioning the way you want them to. Now, if you're listening, I'm going to describe you exactly what I have on the screen. It's a 4-box. And along the vertical axis is the word awareness. Along the horizontal axis is the word resolution. I am willing to bet that most reasons for conflict among a team can fit into one of these 4 boxes. So the top right is expectations that are voiced and met. That's awesome, right? That's where we want to be. That is our goal as coaches, is getting teams to tell each other, here's what I need, and then follow up on what that need is. Below that, or the bottom right, I am really bad at my right from my left. I did a group yoga class this week that was horribly embarrassing.
I'm here for you.
Just disclaimer. Bottom right, needs that are unvoiced but met. So maybe this is, somebody that you just jive with. You're not quite sure why, but it works. So you keep going. Now, the left column is why the world needs coaches. Just like doctors spend most of their time with unhealthy people, chances are this is where you get to spend a lot of your time as a coach. At the top on the left is needs that are voiced but are unmet. And at the bottom is needs that have not yet been voiced and are not met. Kara says it's like Johari's window, but different. I never quite understood Johari. Dean Jones does a great video on it. But here's another way that you could take a look at this is let's give it some words. So unvoiced and met, or bottom right, that's what we just call chemistry, or accidentally awesome. It's great if you can find it. But that's just about, hey, I never even told you what I needed and you read my mind. Probably also all too often what we expect from our partners. In the top, where we're aiming for is we've talked about what we need and we've met it for each other. That's where collaboration lives. And I've said it before on this series and on others, those elements of collaboration from Gallup's work around Power of Two, they're super powerful. I think Saurav's even going to be talking about it a bit tonight around acknowledging that you need each other to get the job done. That's around complementary strengths, a common mission, trust. Unselfishness is kind of the pinnacle of that, where you go into a partnership to benefit yourself, but you come out of it wanting better for the other person. We also call, okay, now let's go over to the quadrant where we live as coaches, the voiced but unmet needs. That's frustration. And if they're unvoiced and unmet, maybe that's just dysfunction or denial. Maybe in some cases, it's also unhealthy resignation. Thanks, Michelle, for that description there in the chat. When I say voiced, I do mean, have you told someone you have this need? Or maybe have you even told the group that you assume you have an expectation? These could be those culturally spotted expectations. Has it been said? So we can use this to not have a prescription, but again, to have a framework of what do we do as coaches. First, we take a look at the strengths and we say, is this just a friction versus function state? Can we just talk about different perspectives? And that might be a quick solve that's worth stopping at. But then if we can't explain it away with strengths and resolve it, which you usually cannot, then we look for how do we first voice this conflict? Then I'll give you a framework for thinking about 3 different options to meet it. But let's think about voicing the conflict and your role as a coach. Here's where I gave you a hook earlier that we're going to use some frameworks that were familiar to you. This is our framework that we typically use for strengths development. What do you do now that you've taken strengths? Well, you name, claim, and aim it. Don't forget that in our coaching courses, we remind you that trust is the ticket to entry. That's where you have to get your wristband before you can go to the concert, is establishing trust with your clients and with the team out loud. Even if you've already established trust with the manager of that team, you really have to keep your eye on your role of caring for the trust sandbox that you are asking the team members to play in. And then you can use name, claim, and aim to really explore what is this conflict that we're talking about. Have you noticed that today we've even tripped over our own words? Do we say conflict? Do we say disagreement? Do we say it's good or bad? Do we say struggle? Well, it's normal that we don't have words for this. Up until you met strengths, you didn't even have words for all the different ways people could be incredible. So give yourself some grace. Here's just some really, I think, basic ways to ask what's going on. Again, in that phrase of voicing the conflict. So name it is what needs are unmet. Claim it, what is important about meeting them. You might even go as bold as to say, what is the cost if we don't resolve it? And maybe this is your out and you're done. It does not, maybe it's a problem that does not need to be solved. It just needs to be let go. Elsa. But then aim it is where you bring up your greatest coaching competencies and really set the rules of engagement for how we're going to explore this together. What do we expect of each other as we discuss? Is this a what happens in the room stays in the room topic? Is this something that we know is going to take us a long time? What can we cover in the time that we have together? Thanks for catching that, Lisa. And to help you remember your role as a coach, I do want to bring in the ICF coaching competencies here, specific to how they overlay with our trust sandbox. I don't think anyone's ever used the word sandbox. So if you're confused by that, it was just the container that name, claim, aim live in. Remember, your role is to keep an eye on the trust container. And you do that through how you set the foundation of what this team is about to talk about, how you co-create the relationship or set that agreement of how far do we really think we can get about this? What does solved for today look like? What does solved long-term look like? And it's okay that those are different. Communicating effectively. How do you underline what some people are saying without placing judgment on it? And again, how do you let them go through the conflict, hold the space to sit wherever they need to sit, and also challenge them to grow from it? I think somebody asked if they could see this slide. You know what? Just take trust and draw it around the ICF coaching competencies that are available for you from the International Coaching Federation. That's all these are. But what I'm hoping to help you connect here is that your effectiveness across these is what builds the sandbox of trust. And while we're still in that space of voicing the conflict, this is a place where you might want to write these down. I've used name, claim, and aim to help you not talk about individual strengths and not even talk about like the team grid, but really help you all get on close to the same page of what is this conflict we're discussing. That also might mean, are the right people in the room to discuss this? And that might mean we need fewer people or we need more parties to really address what's going on. A client shared with me a great story that I'll share with you in a moment about perspective and how first within trust, again, we're going to acknowledge that however anybody feels about this perspective, as long as they deserve being in the room to solve it, their perspective is true. And so that's where we're going to invite people to name their perspective. What do you think this problem is really about? Maybe even what do you think a potential solution is that we could keep in mind and skip ahead to? Some questions that help you name it with a group, not for a group. My favorite one comes from a book that Kurt Liesfeld wrote in that his wife Rosie gave to me after he passed, The Courage to Teach by Parker Palmer. And Parker Palmer talks about how to have engaging dialogue in a classroom. And it's please and thank you. So instead of me just pointing at Jim and saying, Jim, what do you think? You'll notice that I do this when I facilitate your sessions. I say, Jim, please. That acknowledgement that your perspective is valuable and matters. Then you might also just continue to really make sure we're naming the conflict. What are you processing? How does it feel? What is your experience? How do you view this? Here's the story I told you I would tell real quickly. If we're all standing around an apple tree and there's a big, juicy apple hanging from a reachable branch, but the tree is in the middle of the room. It's a magical room that grows trees. Let that part go. We're all standing in a circle around it, and everybody next to me is salivating because A, we love apples. B, it looks divine. It is so ripe and so ready to be picked, but not too ripe. I get all my apples from the grocery store, but you can imagine you're standing in an actual orchard where they grow. And I say, okay, guys, we need to go pick this apple. And so we take a step forward and we even bring other people along with us. But then the rest of the circle is standing on the other side and they look confused, a little angry, potentially even disgusted at the fact that we're about to go pick this apple. If I would have just asked, what are you seeing? One of them would have said, Maika, there is a giant green and black worm crawling out of the side of that apple. Instead, I didn't stop to ask. And they said, how could you possibly want to pick this apple? And then I put all sorts of value on why they wouldn't want me to pick it. And we go farther and farther and farther on because we haven't done this first step of voicing what the need is and sharing the perspective that we have. So if the bad news is there's always going to be conflict on a team, the good news is the team is the way through it. Austin, did that count as your one-liner?
I think that might come close to qualifying for one. Yeah. And that'll make the list.
I didn't even think about that ahead of time. So we're talking about how do you voice the need. The second is you claim it. So thank you again from Parker Palmer. When somebody shares how they're feeling, we say, thank you. We say, okay. We say, what makes that important? And again, we're not solving. Because then we'll get into the aim it space where we might say, go back to that co-creating the relationship from the ICF competency. Where would you like to take this? Let's revisit our goal because sometimes this can bubble up in the middle of a team session that was billed to you as the coach as just come do a retreat. Right? If you're doing your job right, I think sometimes you wade into this territory where people are very honest about difference in a way that is not working out. So maybe it is just saying, what would you like to amend? And from my high school parliamentary procedure team, I know that there are 3 ways to amend something: add, addition, subtraction, or I don't know, something else. Anytime I give you a number, I can't remember all of them. But what do we want to change?
The chat room will cover you on that one.
Thank you. Robert's rules, 3 ways to amend a main motion: addition, subtraction, or I don't know, striking, but it seems like subtraction anyway. But I think it's important to say, what should we add to our original goal? What should we take away from our original goal? Or what should we change altogether? An amendment to a main motion does have to be germane to the main motion. Otherwise, you get a point of order. Reword. Thank you, Laura. And then how does the awareness that you're in right now serve our best selves in the future? So don't run away from the conflict. Don't think you have failed. Acknowledge it and say, okay, what just bubbled up that is important or will be important to you in the future? What should we, Austin said, table it. What should we set aside? And when should we revisit that? So there you've got the name, claim, aim framework for how to voice a need. Austin, you're back.
As you're going through that framework, I think one of the themes that I'm sensing and I'm seeing some conversation and some questions around is really about, like you just said, not avoiding conflict in a session. You're in there with a team or a group. Things aren't perfect. You can sense it. That as coaches, oftentimes we either may feel, is it my place to bring this up in a group? Is it not? Do I call this out now in the moment? Do I try to pull people aside at the end? Like, from your perspective with this construct, when do I put it into practice? Like when do I ask these questions? When do I have this sort of exploratory sort of curiosity, if you will?
So I naturally lean more toward presence than preparation or mastery as I'm facilitating. So I know I have a bias. What I'm about to say is going to sound really brave, but it really is just really true to me. It's not as courageous, for me to say it as it might be for as it's about to come off. There is nothing more real than the present moment. So when you ask this, it's when it comes up and with permission. Again, your job is not to make the team perfect. It's not to make the team happy. It's to help. It's not to make the team feel better. It's to help the team do better. And do might mean performance. It might mean collaboration. And we have to stay committed to that and be present as coaches. Remember, you're not just a facilitator. If you do want your experience with a team to be an event, a keynote, a recognition space, a really fun time, that's fine. But if you're showing up as a coach, not just a facilitator who's got a great PowerPoint, and there is value in that. There is absolutely value in that. But if your intention is to show up as a coach, I think you have to be fully present with the moment and ask for permission. Again, acknowledge, keep your eye on the trust sandbox. If what you're about to ask and provoke is going to pop the trust bubble, then you can't go there, or you might need to ask if you can go there. I was in a team session this week and they were in, it wasn't even negative conflict. It was, they were in a space where they were realizing they're coming from different perspectives. And I said the question, I feel like you're getting to somewhere really important. Is it okay if we stay here a while? What I didn't have to say out loud was, that means I'm not getting to the other cool activity I had planned. But I think if you want your work to be about integrating with theirs and accelerating theirs, then that is, I have a slide on this, that comes back to where your self-orientation lies and how well you're building trust as a coach. Your courage to go there, to voice the needs that are being unmet, means that you're worth taking a risk. You're risking walking out of maybe a client where they're paying you without them feeling sunny, because it's not about you. Because again, it's your job as a coach to stay tethered to groups like this, to peers, to inspiration, to your own body, to your own soul, and stay in that belief that there is a better place you can get to tomorrow. Yeah. And sometimes your job is just to inspire that, to remind them that we're not just here for good, that when you agree that you're focusing on strength, you're focusing on thriving, and good is anybody's game.
No, Maika, I love having you back on. So what I just heard, and I'm going to play this back to you. What I just heard was you walk through the difference between team coaching versus a team presentation, yeah, or a team workshop. If I want to reiterate this because we get, Jim, I know you and I get asked this question a lot. What's the difference between doing a discovery session, a training versus a team coaching session? And what I heard from you, Maika, was the difference is, how do you handle the unspoken issues of a session? Do you put the team's needs first in terms of being able to go where they need to go in the moment versus getting through what you had planned and teaching certain content?
It's also realizing that you, as you're naming it and deciding to pursue it, that's again not your choice. Because this question of, let's revisit our goal, that might be, hey, I was really here to train you on a tool that you could then take forward. Should we stay where we are on that and revisit this later? So the good news is you don't have to make that decision alone. You do have to voice it with the client and with the team. And it could be very fair that they're not ready to really address what you're sensing. But again, I think I learned this from Jackie Merritt, 80% of coaching happens when you're not there. So it's also about trusting people to be their best, most responsible, respectful selves after you leave. And also think about, I think we all could be a little bit better at the consulting and feedback that might happen after a team session, that you can go back and say, hey, manager, now that we're one-on-one, I sensed a few things. Let's talk about what we can do to improve that.
Maika, let me ask you the role of the manager in this, because oftentimes we think of we're mediators in this, but we really just we've been given a manager that has a team conflict. And when we're having those early conversations with those managers, any thoughts on approaching just the manager in that way?
Yeah, I think that fits really nicely into the how do we meet. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If you were looking at the screen and you just now see me and Jim, that was intentional. I've got the how do we meet framework, and then I'll bring the screen back toward the end. So if we voice it through name, claim, aim, that's half of the battle, and maybe even more than half, depending on how long some of these needs have gone unvoiced. Our next step then is how do we help a team meet them? And typically, I think your solutions can live in one of three areas. The first is magical. That's where just talking about it brings up somebody who's raising their hand with a solution. All the dreamy ideas that we have around how could this be easy, that falls in the magical bucket. And sometimes magic happens. I'm not saying that in a, dream state, never going to happen way. The second is temporary, which is typically just work harder. Glad you voiced that. We can't solve it. We're going to fix it with effort. And the third is tough. And tough might include how you have a conversation with the manager, because it could roll back up on, is this manager really doing a good job setting the ground rules and the defining the barometer, setting the barometer for how it feels to be a part of this team. Tough could also mean recasting, reassigning, changing roles, changing goals. And I think that that's important, because it's not going to be the same every time, but also you're just redistributing the energy. Energy is neither created or destroyed, right? So maybe if you can't do the tough solution, you prepare yourself a nice soft landing pad for the temporary one. And you take into account maybe, what the cost of that is going to be. Would it help if I gave you some stories to really illustrate that?
Yeah, it's for time allows. Maybe we can dig into one of those.
Let's just do one. So I think that you can probably consider, key reasons for conflict in relationship to the 4 domains of strength. And executing conflict is a pretty common one, where people feel unfair distribution of the workload, which is also, I bet you heard this from Jillian because she's incredible, a key driver of burnout if work feels unfair. But I think it happens commonly. So your first step is this a strength? Phase 0, is this a strength conflict, right? Are there influencers doing the executing and it's just not working? And then let's voice it through name, claim, aim. And then 3 ways you could meet that. The magical way is, once you voice it, somebody raises their hand and says, oh my gosh, I actually love that part of our team's expectations that you're saying you hate. Why don't you just throw that over the fence to me? That's great. It sometimes happens. The temporary fix is, you're right, I messed up, or we have this wrong. Right now, we just have to keep going. So let's at least adjust our expectations and soldier on. The tough fix is discussing, whether you've got the right people in the right role. And that might include somebody who doesn't like the work that they're doing, somebody who should not be doing that work, and having the hard conversations about what can you change.
Maika, in a strengths-based organization, sometimes that's the hardest conversation to have, where maybe somebody's not in the right role. And we can't figure that out in 30 seconds, in a webinar, right? Or give all the advice on that. But for a manager, for somebody in that role, when that gets kind of obvious or maybe not so obvious, can you talk a little bit about that?
You come back to coaching. And again, release yourself of having the responsibility to make that call. Your responsibility is to challenge that manager or that manager's manager to believe that better is possible. I think sometimes that's the reason it doesn't happen. We have these hedonic set points where we stop expecting, something great. We're just fine with things that one day we used to dream of having. But that's why you're on a learning series. You are supposed to be filled up with that sincere passion that being strengths-based doesn't just mean you can still do all the things all the time and do just fine. It is that nudge, and you also need to do your homework on having data to back you up there, that, hey, there's a big difference in knowing your strengths and truly agreeing that you're in a spot to use them every day. And that's how you get to the 6 times increase, the 3 times increase on engagement and well-being. That's how you create that sort of, yeah, right experience that you walk around and you're like, wow, they really do this here. It's because they've been bold enough to have the hard conversations.
The number one question, I think I've heard Austin alluded to this a little bit earlier when we think about hybrid teams. And I think as we've been thinking about these conflicts, we may be thinking them through the old framework of an office and meetings, and we meet together. Today, it's a mixture of that, right? Can you talk a little bit about the challenges that coaches may face in this new hybrid world?
Yes. And it's going to be around forever. We might as well prepare for it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to peel back the curtain and just tell you what we did with you today. And part of the person who's just brilliant at this is Jim. And Austin, you set us up so well. But I also want to give you something in addition to the frameworks that we've discussed. And that is a concept that I find we have to, again, create, where we may have just relied on being in person to create it for us. It's that you have to it makes your job of tending to the trust sandbox all that much more important. We have to create those guardrails. Did you notice at the very beginning when I asked those 3 rules of engagement? Those we now use in all of Gallup's virtual courses, because we have found that in a virtual environment, it's more difficult to read people based on the ways that we used to. So you can use those as well. It's lead with positive intent, communicate respect, and respond with curiosity. The other thing that we did with you throughout, and we did this a little more organically because Jim and I are so used to reading chat. You don't have to be that level of used to the multitasking that Jim and I are. You can use this idea of a check in, check up, and check out. The check-in that we did with you today was asking you in the chat where you were coming from, but you might do something else, like what are 2 words that describe, what you're bringing to this, or how full is your tank, or what's a recent success. The check up is stopping halfway through more often than you would if you were in person and just saying, how are we doing? And it might be as simple as a yes or no, a should we keep going? Should we go faster? Should we go slower? Should we take a break? But really just taking pause and acknowledging again where we are. And finally, the checkout. What are you taking away? So while each of you do your own checkout, I'll summarize the entire session for you. How about that? Your checkout question, I'd love for you to share in the chat, is what is something that you will be taking away from this session? What's something from the session that you will be taking with you? And while you do that, I'll just give you basically a summary of everything that we discussed today, because I know it was a lot of maybe new brain work. And I think you could summarize it this way. Number 1, conflict is not good or bad. What you do with it is what matters and is what creates the positive or negative experience. Number 2, a coach's role is to hold the trust sandbox so the team can solve. You might also need to consider how you establish that in the very beginning and how you follow up with insights, because you do have that privileged perspective of being an outsider, not being part of the team. Number 3, first, get curious on whether it's just friction over function. Change is always preceded by awareness. Awareness might clear it up. Next, voice it, and you can use name, claim, and aim, and create a team agreement of where you're going. Then meet it. Find the strengths connection. What is being craved and not satiated? And then magical, temporary, or tough, pick your challenge. Finally, what I hope you take away is the call to inspire others. You have to be about 10% more hopeful and vocal about the positive future you believe your clients have in front of them than you ever expect them to be. Because this is not their day job, it's yours. And that's why you're here.
Micah, that's so great, Austin. We're going to ask you to jump back in, and I see some questions out there. Catherine asked, "What about teams where they all say everything's fine?" Right? You had that situation, Micah. Nope, no problems here. And you know that's just a cover, right? Any thoughts or even a manager who says everything's fine, we're all good. Thoughts?
First, it might be. It's rare, but it might be. Don't dismiss that. I would honestly, that's probably what I lead with is, well, then what are we celebrating? What is making everything fine? But I feel like maybe behind that question is a fine inflection, and they don't actually mean positive. That's again, we come back and we start with trust. I would bet that that's a situation where the sandbox is not being tended to, and people don't feel like they can voice things that are less than fine. So you can use a lot of coaching tricks. You can reframe it by saying, okay, if I was looking at this team from the solar system or like bird's eye view, what would I notice? What kinds of things are happening here? You could reframe it on a timeline. What do you want this team to feel like being on in the future? What do you hope this team never lets go of or never loses? This week I used in a conversation, I said, what do you hope the team will let go of? And you might also need to think about modes for engaging individual voices. Perhaps it's, in a chat virtually, you have a really quick way to overcome groupthink because nobody knows what you're chatting until you say it. So you could do give me 2 words to describe how it feels to be part of this team. 1, 2, 3, go. Or in person, maybe you've got notebooks or personal whiteboards that you flip over at the same time. So I think there's a lot of tactics, but the principle that we're getting to is you've got to focus on what can I do to bring out the trust first.
Oh, Micah, thank you. Here, if we were to try to put a bow on this session, here's what I would hope all of the coaches out there can take. Micah just walked through a lot of the sort of mindset piece of this, the mindset you as a coach have to be effective in the moment. And she put her strengths into action on how she'd handle certain situations, right? Got a lot of questions around if somebody doesn't express it, how do you handle that? Or if they say they're fine, how do you handle that? Or if nobody says anything, how do you handle that? Part of what I hope you see is take a framework or a structure like this and figure out how do your strengths shine through that framework? How would you activate that in an authentic way in a session? And how important expectations on the front end and maintaining your focus as a coach on the client and helping them get where they need to be versus what it is you maybe thought was going to happen. We could spend another hour on this. I know we could. We've got enough questions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to answer all of them. If you have a question on this topic you want to learn more about, again, please email coaching@gallup.com. I assure you, Jim, Micah, and I will read any question on this topic and we'll get you an answer, okay? As we wrap this up, tomorrow you'll get an email from us with the opportunity to provide feedback on the session and the content and the sort of overall learning series. Please, that's a very important thing for us to sort of continue to build out content and the learning series in the future. This is the kind of thing Micah just went through. This is the kind of content and sessions we're trying to do more of to be able to get you different angles on topics we've talked about a lot. And the summit this summer, one of the biggest things I'm so excited about is Micah's got a hand on a lot of the content and able to help presenters prepare and get ready for our summit this summer. So she's got a great insight. This is the kind of thing we're hoping to talk more about. And we're going to dig into at the summit. We have learning tracks for coaches. We have learning tracks around engagement, learning tracks around executive coaching, so forth, different topics. June of this summer, June 7th and 8th, we are fully virtual, which allows the whole world to join. we're hoping to have record numbers this year. So please check that out. Be on the lookout for more information from us. Maika, bottom of my heart, thank you. That was fun. I learned several things. My list of one-liners got longer. I actually had somebody ask me to provide my list of one-liners. So I'm gonna have to go through and type them because they're all just handwritten. You won't be able to read that. But thank you, Maika. Jim, as always, appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you all tonight for our final session with Sarov. Be well. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.